Okay, guys, the coronavirus has not gotten to me, or as some other YouTubers like to call it, the beer bug. No offense to Corona, it's a great beer. But in any case, I'm still here and the show must go on, and I'm going to be taking a look at Eragon, 2006's Eragon, which was based on a novel by a teenager named Christopher Paolini. I don't know if it pronounced his name exactly right, but you can look on Wikipedia and find out exactly how to pronounce it, along with numerous other details of the book. Because from what I understand, the book was very popular, 2003 to 2005. It was a series of books. Eragon was considered a successful book after a lot of hard, very hard, and arduous marketing by Christopher Paolini and his parents, who self-published the book until they caught the attention of a publisher and a writer, and the rest is history. However, we're going to be talking about the movie, and this movie, I have to say, is one of the worst book adaptations out there. Now, I haven't read the book myself, but just going by what people have said, and they've said plenty, this is a really bad one. If you're into this type of fantasy genre, stick with the book. Now, I saw this film when it came out in the theater, and I remember seeing it, believe it or not, with my mom, who's 20 years older than me. And I think we went to the theater at the time because we had nothing better to do, and I was visiting her from out of town. And so we went to the matinee, and I remember being adequately entertained by the movie until I started to realize during the running time that this wasn't going to be resolved. And flaws or not, the story wouldn't be resolved. And sure enough, at the end of the film, the story just ends with most everything not being resolved. And it doesn't hint that there's a cliffhanger. I just got this from the running time. And yeah, it was very disappointing, and apparently it was planned to be a series of movies, but there were so many issues with this that made it unpopular that just went nowhere. This just disappeared, and you can find this running even today in 2020, summer of 2020, on HBO, perhaps even Cinemax. It's not worth wasting your time. There's so much better material out there. Even the lowest quality Netflix offerings in this genre are superior. And I have to say that also John Malkovich, this doesn't do him any favors. I mean, I'm a real big fan of his. I like his work. I like even his obscure stuff. However, his performance, his acting performance in Eragon is so cringeworthy bad and beneath his skills. And I have to blame him because it's his performance. It's not his lines. It's not what the script was written for him. No, it's straight up his performance that's the most cringeworthy. And the movie has other flaws, of course, but really that struck me the wrong way. John Malkovich playing a villain, which he's done before, but playing it in a very hammy, over-the-top, unconvincing way. It was a really bad look for him. It made me cringe being a big fan of his work. However, I'm sure he's forgotten about it. Many people have, just as the film has been forgotten about. Now let's take a look at the Rotten Tomatoes score, because this, of course, is an episode of Rotten Reviews. We have a 16% on the tomato meter. That means the critics view this even less favorably than I do. And we have a 47% on the audience score with over 500,000 scores, user ratings. Now, there's no question about it. I agree with these numbers. In fact, I'm surprised that the audience score isn't a little bit lower, but apparently people have given this a pass even more than I would have. But 47%, it's certainly rotten. Here we are doing a rotten review on it. Let's get right into the rotten reviews, and let's actually find out, if people agree with me, or maybe there's another issue. Again, I say the big issue is John Malkovich's performance. The secondary big issue for me is that the main plot problem isn't resolved, with no hint that this is a part one. And the third big issue I haven't mentioned yet, and we're going to find out if others mention it, is that this is very cliched. Now, the book, of course, the original book this is based upon, draws from, very almost overly used fantasy genre tropes. the classic hero's tale and all of that. And I think it hurts this in a lot of ways, though, because this very much, when I watched this recently, not on my first viewing when I saw this in the theater back in the day, it was new, but when I watched this recently a few days ago for this review, it struck me as being very, very almost rip-off-ish, if you will, of the first Star Wars movie. A little bit of a rip-off of King Arthur, but mostly it felt like a rip-off of 1977 Star Wars, with you know, characters with different names, but in the basic same roles that the characters were in the Star Wars movie. Now, you can say Star Wars, George Lucas took his you know, took his story from classic tropes too, and, you know, so I'm not saying that this is just an entire ripoff, but it's very much just gives you that impression that somebody saw Star Wars a few too many times and tried to make a fantasy out of it. And probably not deliberate, but that's how it comes across, and it's just not good. But anyway, I'm diverting again. Let's get into the audience reviews. Let's just start reading right from the top. And, you know, I'm not going to entertain anything above a 3-star review. In fact, I'm probably going to stick to 2.5 star and below, just for brevity's sake, because these videos are already quite long. So let's start right here, a 2-star review, May 16, 2020, making this just within the last week. No doubt about it, the book Eragon is awesome. Christopher Paolini is a superb writer. However, the movie is not very accurate to the book. I could not find a single quote from the book that was in the movie. All I'm saying is that the movie Eragon has less of the key events of the book than most book-to-movie adaptations. Well, okay, that's a pretty bad sign when somebody that read the book is saying they couldn't find a single quote. I guess they're talking about dialogue. There's no dialogue you can match between the book and this screenplay, this movie. That's pretty bad. That means it's almost not a book adaptation, because to be an adaptation, certainly you're going to find dialogue, you know, key scenes and dialogue's going to match, but right off the bat somebody's saying it doesn't, so pretty piss poor adaptation. There's a vote for that. 2 stars, May 12th. Intent was to make a sequel, but not enough success, so story never ends. Yeah, that's an understatement. Like I said, when I was sitting in the theater and I noticed that the runtime was pretty well getting close to 90 minutes, I realized that, wait a minute, no matter what happens, there's no way to resolve this story. And sure enough, boom, it just kind of ends, cuts to credits. Main villain hasn't been dealt with. In fact, almost nothing's been dealt with. Yeah, it's really bad like that. 0.5 star, May 9th, 2020. Let's hear a hoorah for the worst book-to-movie adaptation ever. I'm convinced the director was only given the names of the characters and he went from there. No similarities of character from book to movie. Angsty teen where there wasn't one. And oh yeah, Saphira somehow just ages up like a sim, spins in the air, and now she's big. Brahm's an asshole, Urgals are just savages, Durza's somehow in charge of the Razak, and the Razak are bug things. It goes on, but what they're saying is, yeah, this is another vote for a piss-poor adaptation, and it is true. Saphira, the dragon that starts out as an egg and a hatchling and becomes a full-scale dragon to the main character, yeah, it's almost like overnight how she turns from an egg to a hatchling to a big dragon, and she just spins up in the air and suddenly morphs almost like a cartoon character into a large dragon. Not real convincing. And you know, the tone of the movie is a little bit too serious. It doesn't have the tone of a cartoon episode or a cartoon production. It's definitely not for little kids. It's got the tone of something meant for teenagers and adults, and the rating to match. And yet you have this, the mechanics and the verisimilitude, or whatever you want to say, the believability of what's going on in the film is very cartoonish, and, you know, just things poofing into other things, and a lot of magic that happens and is shown to you, but with no setup, with no backstory, with no rule set in place, and it's very cartoonish, and yet the tone isn't cartoonish, and it's really bad. It's not just the adaptation, but it's the execution of just who is this targeting. In one regard, it's like it's written for little kids, with little kids mechanics, and in another regard, it's definitely tonally written for teenagers and adults. So It's all over the place, but let's move on. 1.5 star, April 28th. The visual effects are mostly great. The costumes are beautiful. Jeremy Irons delivers great performance. The story is not appealing. The resolution is very weak. The lead actor is disappointing. The character development, character interaction, and introduction are bad. Some animations need improvement. Well, yeah, I agree with all that. The visual effects were fine. They were fine back in the day. I had no problem with them when I saw this in the theater. Same with the costumes, same with the sets. The production value was fine. However, Jeremy Irons, he's basically, to me, he reminded me of a swapped out version of Ben Kenobi from Star Wars. He's in that role, the same archetype, and it was obvious when I saw it in the theater, and it's even more obvious now. Jeremy Irons feels like a low-budget ripoff of Obi-Wan Kenobi. Again, a Star Wars ripoff. That's just the way this comes across. The lead actor is disappointing. Again, John Malkovich. That's an understatement. For John Malkovich, it's more than disappointing. It's almost like he destroyed himself. I just can't explain how he performed so poorly. It was all him in that regard. Character development, yeah, everything was rushed. Again, it's like something made for little kids, cartoonish, in that everything is rushed, everything mechanically that happens, everything moving from point A to B is very rushed and cartoonish, and yet the tone is like, they're trying to convince adults and teenagers to take this seriously. It doesn't work. It's a big failure in that regard. Half a star. The book is awesome, but the movie should get 0.1 stars. Half a star. Bad, 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 bad. Great visual effects and some good casting choices. Every single other aspect is atrocious. Well, let's pause right there. I do have a small list. Let's go through my list here. Right on the top of my list, I was taking these notes while I watched it. John Malkovich, bad acting, bad script and dialogue. Yeah, but mostly that script and dialogue wouldn't have come across so bad if John Malkovich's performance had been up to his own standards. It was just really bad. Number 2 on my list, too much magic happening too fast without setup. Yeah, normally in a fantasy, especially in a fantasy or in science fiction, you want your world building to be there. You want rules to be in place. If magic is going to happen, you want some indication of how it happens, what are the rules and limitations on it, because otherwise it's, you're just going nowhere. It's not believable, and we don't get that. Magic is just happening with no setup or explanation, and it's obvious from the effects what is happening. I'm not saying that the magic's confusing or that we don't know what is happening when we see the effects on the screen. No, that's very much clearly understandable. It's just that we don't know what's the background of this, what is possible, is this unusual magic, is it usual, are these extraordinary events in this world, or are these just regular events and everybody sees this type of stuff all the time? We don't get that setup, we don't get that believability factor. It's just a complete fail. We're seeing a lot of cool stuff. It's obvious what it is and what it's doing, but we just don't know how it fits into anything or what we should think about it. The believability is just really bad. Number 3 on my list, of course, I mentioned before, Star Wars themes, follows plot from the 77 film. Yes, because it's just really in my face. It was a little bit there back in the day when I saw this as a new film in the theater, but watching this in the last few days, it just pops right into my face like somebody's holding up a big sign that says, hey, I ripped this off from Star Wars, don't you like it? Well, I didn't really like it. I just found it kind of off-putting. Number 4 on my list, yeah, rain. Overuse of things that aren't subtle, like, for example, when it shows this young boy, he's, in the character, he's like the Luke Skywalker of the story. When it shows him, going through his travails, his journey to manhood, or whatever you want to call it, when it shows him in circumstances, there's just rain falling all around him in a depressing fashion. Then it just cuts right away to something else happening, and all of a sudden it's warm and sunny and beautiful again. And it's just overuse of like tropes, weather tropes, to try to convince us of things. But the problem with using these weather tropes like this in a ham-handed fashion is that it takes away again from the believability of the story. It's jarring, it's off-putting. I just noticed it that I had to take note of it. Every time it showed the main character and something happening to him that wasn't good, it would just start raining all around him all of a sudden and be depressing looking. But then when something else happened that was meant to be adventurous, or 5 minutes later was meant to be exciting, all of a sudden it's bright and sunny again and the rain is all gone and there's no hint that it was ever there and everybody's clothes are dry. And again, that might work in a cartoon thing for kids, but I mean, it's just really stupid and something meant to be taken seriously by adults or even teenagers. It's on my list here. Next thing on my list, no world building attempted. Not just that there wasn't world building, but like they didn't even attempt it. Clearly, this was not marketed. I remember seeing this again as a new movie in the theater. This was not marketed to people that had read the book, because I hadn't even heard of the book back in the day, and yet I still ended up in the theater to see this. They just expected the audience to know what kind of fantasy world this was, and I'm sorry, but even if you're familiar with a lot of other fantasy worlds like Lord of the Rings and etc., and there are many out there, believe it or not, you just don't know what the hell's going on or what the significance of anything is, because they didn't even try to have even a little bit of world building. And when they did try a little bit of it, because of explaining Jeremy Irons' character's background, for example, there was just the tidbits to tell you how he got to where he was, but it was way too late into the running time of the film, so you felt like nothing had any weight to it because you're way into this thing before you even figure out what the hell is going on, what's the world about. It was way too late, so they didn't even attempt the world building that's in my notes. Again, in my notes, looks good but boring instead of suspenseful. Yeah, it was definitely attempting to be suspenseful, but it wasn't, and it just came across as boring because we've seen a lot of this stuff in other fantasy genre films, and there was nothing to distinguish it, and so you're just going through the motions. Halfway into the running time, you're just along for the ride, but you've seen all this stuff before, so again, it has no weight to it. And I have other stuff on my list, but let's get back into the reviews. Half a star, bad, 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 bad. Great visual effects and some good casting choices. Okay, I read that, but it bears repeating. Half a star. This movie don't follow the first book, although in the book, Saphira speaks by telepathy. In the movie, she does not give the same impression. The author himself said that this movie was really nonsense. Well, that kind of speaks for itself. Yeah, the dragon is speaking by telepathy. I noticed that it didn't feel exactly right because, yes, it's shown that the main character is getting he's getting the communication from the dragon. The audience can hear the dragon's voice just like she's speaking, except it's basically you're hearing the words in the main character's head. And yet other characters, Jeremy Irons' character, for example, he acts like he can hear her voice too, and things are way too convenient for something that's supposedly telepathy happening in the main character's head. There's a lot of things going on. It's just not convincing in that regard. Half a star. What the fuck did they do to a perfectly good book? I mean, Arya's not even an elf. Yeah, well, I can't speak to that, but again, somebody read the book and they're not impressed. Let's move on to page number 2. We have half a star, December 12, 2019. All the money went into the creation of the dragon. It could be, but the dragon wasn't that impressive. It was just a CGI dragon. By today's standards, it wasn't bad, but it wasn't anything eye-popping. Did all the money go there? I suspect a lot of the money went there, but I would suspect a lot of the money went to John Malkovich to get him to participate. But it's too bad that movie didn't get him to participate sincerely. Half a star. Not really similar to the book at all, to be honest. 1.5 stars. I am a huge fan of the Eragon books, and they are very good. Never a boring moment. Unfortunately, the movie wasn't that good. They have told a very different story and have been changing the characters to the unrecognizable. They should have shown more of how Eragon took care of Saphira and the true story behind her name. The training Eragon got from Brahm before he died was way more extensive. He even had to learn how to read and was visiting multiple places. In the movie, it's very cartoonish. It just brushes over stuff. You get a training montage and you get some very basic flying around on the back of a dragon for the first time, and it's not quite as bad as the training montage you see in, well, let's mention Star Wars. Star Wars, The Last Jedi, where Luke Skywalker refuses to train Rey, and when she does get some training, it's just a few minutes of her swinging a lightsaber around some rocks, and all of a sudden she's just trained up. Well, it's not quite as bad as that, but almost, where the training is just very superficially, just the bare minimum that you can get away with saying that there was some training that Brahm, Jeremy Irons' Obi-Wan Kenobi character, that he trained somehow Eragon. In the very most minimal, superficial way you could get away with on film, and I'm sure, yes, that the book puts it to shame. Again, it's like everything's very cartoonish, but the tone isn't. Half a star. I read the books. If I had the ability to give this film negative stars, I very much would. The first movie was a god-awful fucking travesty. The director should have been shot, and the writers imprisoned. No one fucking read the books. They basically just opened up a fan Wikipedia, not even the book's wiki, and just fucking picked paragraphs at random to make scenes of. Absolute trash, and I can't imagine that they'll be able to repair the damage they've done without making a 7-hour movie. Yeah, that's the unfortunate thing about really bad movie adaptations of books. Even if the books are great, even if there's a whole lot of books, even if there are books that come out after the movie fades into obscurity, and those books are great, the movie adaptations can do a lot of damage to a writer's career, because a writer signs on to a movie deal and it sounds good, and that money comes in, and the promise of royalties perhaps, and you're, as a writer, you're thinking that this movie will propel you, it'll propel your books, it'll propel your writing career, and yet if it bombs like this, yeah, it can really hurt you, it can really set you back, and that's part of the risk, I guess, of any business, and writing's a business too. But I would say that this movie really set Eragon, the book series, back, because if this movie had succeeded, if this movie had succeeded, it'd be a different story. You'd have multiple movies, maybe even more books, spin-off books, TV shows. Who knows? There'd be a Netflix series by now. And so one bad shot like this, one bad movie adaptation, can really screw you. And some authors come back from it really well. Like, look at Stephen King. I can't even remember the amount of bad movie adaptations based on Stephen King's short stories and movies that are out there, and some bad TV shows as well. But he's so prolific, and he's just like the type of writer that just never stops. I mean, he probably just literally never stops from day to day writing new material, that, all those bad adaptations didn't really seem to slow him down at all. But, for a lot of writers, it's going to do some damage, but let's move on. Half a star, that's a repeat. Let's read one 3-star, find out why they gave it 3 stars, from September 9th, 2019. Not a very good film. It is a decent adaptation of a book written by a 16-year-old. The book is a little better, but still very derivative of better works. Well, yeah, the writer himself says that he was inspired by all these other fantasy genre trope, like Lord of the Rings. You can look at the Wikipedia and see what he's said he based it all upon. Again, that's not a problem if you do it in an original way. And nobody's saying that the books weren't successful. On the contrary, the book's considered successful. But the movie, no, the movie's just like, you're taking something that's, very derivative of other works, and then instead of spicing it up and making it unique and putting a new twist on it, you're just, you're making it look like more of a rip-off of some of those things like Star Wars, and then throw in the bad acting, and it's very bad. 2 stars, yes, pretty rubbish. Same as books show some promise. 1.5 stars. It just wasn't a good movie. If I hadn't read the book before, it would have been very confusing, and it actually still was. I feel that the director had a lot of pressure to make the theatrics wow the audience, especially after the success of The Lord of the Rings. Try less hard next time. Well, some of it might have been, at the end of the film, you get this kind of like a climactic battle with dragons, with two dragons fighting each other, and the army on the ground. And I think there was pressure to try to make it so that video games could have been based upon it, and there probably was a video game for all I know. I didn't care to look into it. But, if this had been a successful movie and you had these dragons battling each other, I'm sure the video game rights were just dangling out there for some company to snatch up. And, you can see that in a lot of movies, how they've designed things in the movie to be adaptable to a video game. I felt even at the time when I saw this in the theater that it was made to be one of those things, that they had planned on a video game or two coming out based upon this. And, obviously it didn't work out, did it? 2 stars. Eragon tries its best to bring the children's book to life, and it does offer us some nice backdrops. Unfortunately, it brings nothing new or anything that we haven't seen before. The characters were generic and forgettable. The action was dull and extremely limited. The story felt more like a checklist than an actual plot. Its script really needed a rewrite, and the villain has no reasoning. It's one of the most cliched fantasy film adaptations of all time. Yes, I agree with that 100%. It very much felt like a checklist that you've decided that you need certain things to happen that you've taken from other more popular works, and you just move through those things. It very much felt like paint by numbers, Star Wars put into a fantasy world. And again, the villain, not only was the performance very bad by John Malkovich, but like this person writes in this review, the villain didn't have any setup. Why was he doing what he was doing? Why was he acting the way he was acting? He was just bad and obnoxious and an asshole to be one. No reason why, and you never find out by the end. The only thing you get at the end before it goes to the credits is that he's not done being an asshole and that he's not done fighting Eragon or whoever yet. And you never really get a sense, because of the lack of world building, just what he controls in this world. Does he control all of the world? Does he control most of it, but parts of it he doesn't? You just don't get that. You get the sense that he's an asshole and he's struggling to get power or maintain his power. But just what does he have power of or over? You never find out in this film. He's just there doing what he's doing. There's no background setup to him, plus the bad acting. And I'm just going to keep mentioning that bad acting because, damn, I really like John Malkovich. And he just really fucked this up. Sorry to be blunt, but he did. 0.5 star. Brutal to watch. Causes almost physical pain. Wow, it wasn't that bad. But let's go back to my list. There's a few more things. Plot problem that I wrote down while I was watching it. Big battle just magically ends when the villain is killed, despite King's army massively outnumbering them. Yeah, well, when I say villain, there's actually 2 villains. There's the evil king played by John Malkovich, and then there's a secondary minor villain, like the one that's actually battling our hero directly and riding another dragon, and he's played by a character that I've seen in a lot of TV. I could look up his name, but I'm lazy. I've seen him in a lot of TV shows. I've seen him in Once Upon a Time. He played Rumpelstiltskin in Once Upon a Time. He also played in Stargate Universe. He plays a very good villain. He looks like a villain. He's a very strange, evil-looking guy, even without a lot of makeup on. In this film, he has like reptilian contact lenses and evil-looking makeup. And he looks very much the part, like this evil dragon-riding villain. Well, when he's defeated and his dragon is defeated, all the other stuff just magically falls away, like it's just like magically everything, all the bad guys collapse and the good guys win. Very convenient, too convenient. It happens in a lot of like low budget fantasy and sci-fi where, you just defeat that one piece, that head piece of the big army, and all the other drones collapse or die away, or demons or whatever. And it's got that trope going on. It's very unsatisfying and too convenient, and just a cheap out way to end the main battle at the end, just too cleanly and cheaply. And it was just, I don't know what to say other than, you're just like left hanging with a feeling like you've been played by a fool for sitting through this whole thing. But let's look at the last thing on my list that I wrote while I was watching it. Again, I noted that it's a plot problem. Story unresolved, left for sequel or sequels. Yeah, I mentioned that before, and other people have. They didn't even try to have like a subplot that could be resolved. Basically, the whole thing was unresolved. Yes, the evil secondary villain was defeated, but he wasn't really a major part of the plot. He was just a henchman of the evil king. Um, it was very unsatisfying. I'm going to read one more page on these just to see if there's anything else anybody mentioned. So no one accuses me of being unfair. I haven't had to skip hardly any, I told you at the beginning I wouldn't read anything 3-star or above. I did read one 3-star, but I'm going through pages of this and I'm finding very few reviews above 2 stars. Very few. Incredibly few, as in 1 or 2. So I'm being very fair, I think, in just panning the shit out of this film. 2 stars. This is a depressing movie that ruined a favorite childhood book. 1/2 star, one of the worst movies I've ever suffered through. I turned it off halfway through. 1/2 star, as a huge fan of the Inheritance Cycle novels, I was more disappointed than usual at a film adaptation. The acting was bad, it was horribly unfaithful to the source material, and destroyed any chance of a good film version of the story ever being released. And to add insult to injury, Paolini signed off on it. As an aside, like I said, that's the risk, as a writer, a new writer, and maybe even his parents. You want that money. You've never had it before, so you sign off on it, and it can do irreparable damage to your writing career because, yeah, not everybody's Stephen King and can bounce back from that. But let's read on. All interesting story elements and anything that made sense of this heaping dumpster fire was stripped away to create a fantasy version of Star Wars because everyone loves Star Wars, right? Well, wow, somebody got the same impression I did. It feels very much like somebody ripped off major elements, plot, and characters from Star Wars, gave them different names, put different coats of paint on them, and tried to shove them down our throats as something new and exciting, and that's just not going to cut it. 1/2 star, not just a bad adaptation, but a bad movie in general. I don't recommend anyone waste their time. I don't either. 2 stars, a dumb, preachy ripoff of Star Wars. Some scenes may be fun, yet most of the film is a dumb mess. 1.5 stars. How to ruin good source material. Eragon had very good and solid adventures in the books. The story was compelling and the characters were well developed. However, the movie chooses to crap all over this legacy, even though the cast is well chosen. The script, dialogue, CGI, and terrible acting by the lead actor makes this movie really forgettable. Hope this franchise gets a remake or maybe a Netflix series to do the book's proper justice. Well, I don't think that's going to happen because there's too much other material out there in this genre that's not good either, but a lot better than this. And it's also on Netflix and Hulu and Amazon Prime. And we're in the middle of the streaming wars. No, no, no. No one's going to waste money on Eragon. Again, I'm going to say it. There's a lot of stuff in the same genre out there that's already money chasing very risky material. There's no way after this movie that Eragon's going to be revisited for a very long time, and I'd put money on that. Somebody else's money, hopefully. 4 stars. 4 stars. Okay, I'm going to read a 4-star. 4 stars. I wish this would have made all 3 and that more of the book was included in the movie plot, but all in all, I liked it. That doesn't sound like 4 stars. But I would have agreed with those words there, that all in all it was okay, back in the day when I saw this in the theater, and I would have agreed with that up until I realized the plot wasn't going to be resolved. And then, yeah, it just ended to credits, and I was like, wow, I wasted my $12 or whatever to see it. But yeah, that doesn't sound like a 4-star review. Funny, there's 4 stars, but they're talking like maybe they're even undecided that it's 3. So I don't believe them. It doesn't feel right. But anyway, I'm not reading any more of those. 3 or 2.5 stars. Ugh. This movie is awful, but it's so awful it's hilarious. If you've read the books, which you should if you haven't, you will be disappointed with this movie. It skips over so much of the book and it changes so many things. I hate this movie for the bad name it gave to a fantastic book series, but I love how much you can laugh at the awful dialogue. No, I wish, but it's not one of those films that's so bad it's good that you can crack open a beer or two or a six-pack and laugh your ass off at how cheesy and bad it is. No, I mean, John Malkovich does his best at making it into that type of weird thing, but no, that's where it ends. The rest of it just expects you to take it serious, and so no. It's just too boring to be that kind of so bad that it's good. I wish it was, but it's not, or this would be a different kind of review. That's about all I'm going to read on those. I don't think we're going to get anything new. Again, 16% on the tomato meter. I think that's fair. Most of the critics, yeah, I can't imagine that they would have found anything redeeming in this. If they read the book, it's even worse because people that have read the book are even more offended than just the casual fantasy genre fans. And so, yeah, all that money went into it, and does it list the budget? Let's take a look. Well, it says the box office made $75 million. So since it was considered a failure, even back in the day, I remember that it was, we can guess that the budget was in the marketing. The budget for the production and the marketing was a lot higher than $75 million. Yeah, it's a lot of money into something that's like no better, comes across no better as a really bad acted ripoff of Star Wars. And a lot of people have mentioned that it was great casting, and look at the cast. Fantastic. I mean, they've all been in fantastic movies, some in starring roles, some in supporting roles, vice versa. John Malkovich, wow, he really fucked up in this movie. The others, well, Jeremy Irons, he didn't have much to do. I won't say Jeremy Irons did a bad performance at all. It's just that he didn't really have much to do. He was a major character. He was the Obi-Wan Kenobi character in this Star Wars ripoff, but he didn't have much to work with. He wasn't given much to do. He was very generic. And so, even in a bad movie, I've seen Jeremy Irons in a much more effective role. So I don't know if that's a bad casting. It's just basically you've got great stars there, but nobody has anything remarkable to do. And the only one person that did have something remarkable to do put in the worst performance I've ever seen him put in. John Malkovich, and I'm saying it again because that's how bad it was. But yeah, anyway, that's going to end my rant, my little rant on Eragon. It's been a while. I haven't done a rotten review in a while because I've been busy. I'm one of those essential workers. Don't get me started on that. I don't feel very essential, but I feel like, I'm working. I've been working the entire time, and I've been working even more than normal. Too much to be worried about YouTube videos. But I'm going to try to get back into it, and I'm going to try to put more of my opinion out there for better or worse because it's kind of interesting to do this. It beats watching more bad political news and beer virus news. So anyway, I'll see you again, probably, hopefully soon, on another edition of Rotten Reviews or on an edition of some other thing I come up with. And until then, have a good one.